to the InnerVerse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All to the InnerVerse podcast. I'm your host, Chance, here to pry open your third ear and help you hear between the lines of our established worldview story, to invoke the energy of limitless potential through your divine imagination portal and loosen up what's been rigid in our perception of who we are, and in this episode, where we may have come from. As anyone paying a modicum of attention has surely perceived, our Earth Mother is most curiously covered with mysterious architectural creations from ages long past. Not just the pyramids of Giza with their utterly unsatisfying mainstream origin story of quarried rock, enslaved builders, and ludicrous rope and pulley systems, but countless places just as strange besides. The truth is that these sorts of strange stone sites span across at least 6 continents, and most of these megalithic marvels have equally improbable attributions as to their architects and construction techniques. Who were these peoples of the polygonal masonry, capable of manipulating massive and oddly shaped boulders that fit together with less than paper-thin gaps between each piece? What do we make of the ubiquitous and strange knob-like formations, seeming to have been shaped as a childhood Play-Doh, but out of solid rock? And why do the myths and legends of indigenous cultures where these marvels are found speak of a long-lost previous race, occasionally styled as giants, or something other than the sort of humans that we know, and powerful Golden Age civilizations said to have been swept away by a universal deluge in symmetrical tales throughout the world? Well, if your curiosity has ever been piqued by pondering these enigmas, you're in good company today as we welcome the multi-talented author, photographer, and graphic designer Camille Sauvé to the show. In her book, Sorcerers of Stone, Architects of the Three Ages, Camille fearlessly analyzes this forbidden archaeology, drawing inferences from both material sciences and spiritual sources to open the Pandora's box of possibilities as to just what we might be able to learn from the technically sophisticated sacred sites around her home in Peru and those like them across the earth. Exploring everything from geopolymers to cymatics and sound healing, as well as what the myriad powers of the mind might have been capable of creating in ages where humanity retained a purity of spiritual vision, Camille's research paints a more concrete picture of the great monomythic cycle of the destruction and regeneration of the world than any legend ever could. And due to the visual nature of analyzing these architectural wonders, I highly recommend our audio listeners find this episode on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, or Rockvin, because we're going to try to show you the incredible synchronization of styles between the stone sites that we discuss. Check the episode description for links to Camilla's website, sorcerersofstone.com, and her book of the same name, along with the many ways you can support InnerVerse and get more out of it. And a big thanks to all the patrons who keep the show growing and glowing. With that, let's dig in. Everyone, welcome the esoteric excavator and ancient architecture acolyte, Camille Sauvé. Thanks for being here and bringing your research to the show.
Thank you very much, Chance. I'm happy to be here and share what I know about this beautiful country called Peru.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what drew you to there, where you came from. Your name, I'm saying Camilla, but it's Camille. I'm sorry about that. But Camilla, I found interesting. In Italian, that means acolyte, or like a helper of the priest or priestess, and almost resonates with the work that you've been drawn to.
well, one of the reasons I'm here in Peru is I really fell in love with it about 14 years ago. And I was here with a friend. I was visiting her in Ecuador, and she said, let's go down to Peru and go to Machu Picchu. I basically fell in love with Cusco and much of the sites that I found around the Sacred Valley, as well as the people, the beauty of the place, and the mysteries that are all around. And mysteries we're still trying to figure out today, like who created these massive megalithic sites, and even the work that is below these megalithic sites, which I find particularly amazing and something not really covered by in detail by the archaeology community. So that is really what has captured my heart, is what they call the Hanan Pacha work. And this is the most mysterious and magical of all the types of constructions that one can find here in Peru.
And the Hanan Pacha refers to like from heaven, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yes. There's basically 3 different styles of construction that are found here, and there's probably some crossover as well. And there was a Cusqueñan man, his name was Alfredo Gamarra, and he noticed these 3 particular styles, and he referred to them as Hanan Pacha, Uran Pacha, and Uku Pacha. And with the various styles are related to the age and also the architectural styles, which are very different. So the reason he thought these weren't all built by the Inca or the Quilque, which are more recent civilizations, is because of what you can see as overbuilding. So you'll find one particular style of architecture underneath the megalithic style, and then on top of the megalithic style and around it is the more recent Inca style or Quilque or Ware. So this is why he thought these were different cultures, and he also believed these were related to different time periods where the Earth had a different orbital relationship around the sun. So I explored a lot of his theories regarding, this different orbit, and also his son, Jesus, and Jean-Pierre de Jong, which was an associate of his, also thought this could be related to an expanding Earth theory as well. So these are some of the things that I explore in my book, but it's not strictly about these particular theories, but it just brings up some really interesting ideas about humanity, different civilizations on the Earth. And we can find, like with the Hanan Pacha work, and also with megalithic, we can find examples all around the world. So it's not just in Peru, but it seems like Peru has more of them concentrated here than practically any other place in the world. So it's a really interesting place to find yourself in if you're interested in archaeology or advanced civilizations, and also to try and figure out this puzzle, which doesn't seem like archaeologists are putting this together as a worldwide civilization, even though we see the examples, very similar examples, like, for instance, in Jerusalem, in Bulgaria, we see them in Japan, China, so almost the identical type of construction. It really presents a very interesting theory about perhaps a worldwide civilization.
Right. It's in Europe, they call it the Cyclopean style.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that's referring to being one-eyed, but maybe that's talking more about like a third eye open type of description.
Yes.
I've even heard it said about some of those constructions are attributed to Amazonian cultures, fascinatingly enough, by like ancient authors. And these Amazons that are depicted with like one breast cut off could have maybe been a misunderstanding of the idea of like a marriage of the masculine and feminine principle, like a half male, half female androgynous deity that then gets misunderstood by later like Greek authors as some kind of literal expression of a one-breasted warrior woman. I'm not sure, but the polygonal masonry of like ancient Etruria and all around the Mediterranean it's fascinating to see that as far reaching across the globe as our Americas. And there's definitely a huge gap in honesty, I would say, about the similarity between these sites. Could you talk about what are some of the attributes of this architectural style that are ubiquitous around the world?
Well, there's even as I mentioned, the three particular styles. The one that is before the megalithic is the one that you tend to see. Well, I find it more fascinating because there's actually less known about it than the megalithic sites, because most people who come to Peru and they go to places like Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo, they see the megalithic site and they're like, well, they're pretty blown away by it. You know, it's the scale is so overblown, basically. It's not like human size at all. And this is where we can look into the idea of the Cyclopeans and that particular style. But even below this stuff is a really fascinating style, the Hanampacha. And this is what we find in the foundation stone, which is under the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And this is where, like, the Abrahamic religions believe that the earth was created. With both the Muslims, the Jewish traditions, they say this is where God created the earth. And so you find these formations, which are very kind of surreal. They don't look like typical buildings that we would associate with being created by humans. We don't find it being used for shelter, windows, doorways, massive ceilings. These are just like art projects. And, you'll have stepped up chakanas. You'll have basins formed into them. You'll have just kind of very strange forms that you can't really ascribe as shelter or normal construction. So these particular constructions I found like in Japan, Bulgaria, you see them in Egypt, which are underneath the pyramids, Germany, you can find them. And it's so this is the thing that even fascinates me. This is before the colossal megalithic work that so many people are really fascinated with in the ancient civilization genre. So who are these people that even built this earlier form of construction? And another thing that you typically see is the cultures that came after, like the megalithic and the Inca and Etruscans. They recognized this earlier work as being very sacred, and they tended to build their buildings right on top of it. And in the case in Peru, much of the megalithic work is built to fit perfectly in the grooves and the recesses of this Hanampacha work. It's quite fascinating to look at, to look at how they really revered these sites and built so perfectly into them, and the fact that they're everywhere around the world, it just leaves one to wonder about the possibility of an advanced civilization that was worldwide. So, yeah, quite fascinating.
Yeah, and the fingerprints are so clear in terms of forensic evidence that it's not even at this point, in my opinion, it's not even if there was an ancient worldwide civilization. It's when and what sort of civilization, and maybe where did they originate from? And those kind of questions might not be answerable by, physical material means, which is interesting how you bring up like spiritual sources and remote viewing and Steiner and people of that nature getting information from dreams and psychic and non-physical means to at least possibly shed some light onto the question, not necessarily admissible in a court of law in terms of evidence, but still interesting nonetheless. And I also think that the mythological similarities attributed to these type of sites, that they're called the navel of the world by the people that are around there, or the sacred center, and oftentimes associated with ideas like the Holy Mountain or Mount Meru, or the place where the flood hero landed in his boat and began civilization anew and gave the people the laws. That seems like either one culture spread that story around, or in more than one place, some people survived some kind of event on boats and then got out of their boats and taught like more primitive people how to rebuild their society. Now, we can speculate all we want about this, but that's kind of the fun, is the high octane speculation. What kind of picture of the ancient civilization have you entertained in your mind from looking at all this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think a lot of the sites that, at least around Peru, I'm not an expert in Egypt or any of the sites, in some far-reaching parts of the earth. But I've spent enough time investigating the wakas. They call them sacred sites here, and they happen to be on what they call seke lines, and these are lines that are radiating out from what they call the Sun Temple here. And this was the most important temple within the Inca Empire. It's probably older than that, but that's what conventional archaeology likes to say. This is all Inca. But anyways, there's 42 lines that radiate out from the Coricancha. And they find that all of these wakas, sacred sites, are placed directly on these lines. And there's theories that these lines are fracture zones or places where water flow is flowing through there, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of the wakas I have noticed have been on water passageways, or they have water underneath the rock. And so you have discontinuity zones between different types of earth. If it has, like, for instance, a lot of water or a lot of minerals, and it's butted up to a part of land that doesn't have, that may be drier and with less minerals. And this is where a lot of electromagnetic movement or telluric currents are flowing through. And so if these seke lines are actually ley lines or on fracture zones, it might mean that these telluric currents are flowing through these zones. And these rocks are actually, they're actually being kind of holding that energy. So if you have a rock with a lot of quartz or a lot of quartzite in it, it tends to store electromagnetic energy, and then you'll also have like a magnetic zone, also an attractive zone for these energies. And this is where a lot of Pacos or shamans from the Andes do a lot of work. So they come up here, they do prayers for the Apus, the mountains here, for Pachamama, but they're probably also going into altered states of consciousness as well. So, and that's something you can kind of feel if you're really sensitive at these zones, is that you do feel like there's charged energy at these places, and some of them are actually portals, like Ñapa Iglesia. And so, what kind of forces are happening at these zones that are facilitating, helping humanity, have altered states? That's where archaeology doesn't do a lot of work for these particular sites, which is kind of unfortunate. Because, people who are meditators or, as I said, the shamans, they come to these sites for a reason, but that's really not the purview of the archaeological world, unfortunately.
Yeah, you hear, if you listen long enough or seek them out, you'll hear so many anecdotes that, sure, they're not provable stories, but these stories that have consistency from person to person of somebody that maybe walking through one of these doorways at one of these sites, seemingly a door to nothing, and coming out into another dimension or a different time period, getting into some sort of crazy adventure there before finding their way back. And they tell stories that are not exactly identical, but similar enough that you got to at least take them into account, that if not a physical transportation, that there's some kind of powerful effect on the consciousness of the individual, and maybe they're experiencing a type of shamanic journeying, something along those lines. Yeah. But they get really far out, some of these tales.
Yeah. There's one guy who has had an experience at Aramamuru, which is down by Lake Titicaca, Jim Wills, and he describes actually going through one of these portals by chanting 3 tones. And that just kind of opened up this portal that took him into another realm where he met another individual somewhere in some, multidimensional universe. So, yeah, I mean, and there's enough legends and stories from the locals about seeing similar things where people just disappear when they're in front of these portals. Frequently when they're singing or chanting. So, that's, it's something quite magical, but we can't really explain it 100% what's going on.
Yeah, it's a fascinating mystery, and it's a great thread to open up about the sound aspect to these sacred sites. I want to return to that, but you bring up the work of this dude I'd never heard of, Alfredo Gamarra, in your book. And I like any author that will open up a subject and explore it, and then even if coming to conclusions that don't support what that initial thread was, they still include the thread of that research to show why they came to that conclusion, rather than, sort of sticking with something that they've found evidence against. So in terms of like the orbital question, the different orbits of the Earth, you didn't find very compelling evidence for that aspect of these 3 ages that Gamarra describes about these various sites in South America. But the growing Earth theory, I thought, did have some possibilities behind it. And it's something I've entertained before for other reasons. I have a friend who's been on the show a few times. It's been a while, Michelle Gibson, who has explored the possible, I think she kind of demonstrates it, but the sacred geometric alignment of various important megalithic sites around the world, that if you draw lines between them, you get shapes and like the flower of life and things along those lines. And she's theorized in the past, and I found it compelling, that in an age where the Earth may have been smaller, these sites might have been aligned because they were actually closer together. And as the Earth grew and pushed them away from each other, they retained this sort of alignment. And you're talking about that with these ley line, these radiating 42 lines out of this sun temple. We talk about the growing Earth possibility that you explored in your book.
Well, yeah. One of the things that I found out were even some big names were considering this particular idea of this expanding Earth, including Nikola Tesla, Newton, and Darwin. And they were describing. Specifically, Darwin was describing like he was he was in Patagonia, and he was seeing like evidence of like the Earth expansion by seeing these stepped layers within. I guess it was near the coastline, and he theorized that perhaps the Earth had been expanding to make these particular forms that he was seeing in Patagonia. And also with Tesla, he describes a condensation of etheric material, which would cause basically all the planets and all the stars to actually expand. So I'm not sure of the physical process of how this would happen, but this was something he through his math and brilliant brain figured out, like all the celestial bodies were expanding in the universe. So how this is done, it's a good question, but it seems to be like there was an attraction of energy in the universe that was concentrating and condensing, and if it's in a singularity of a planet or a sun, it would cause these bodies to expand. So that was really interesting, seeing that these prominent scientists were actually entertaining this idea and actually believed in it. And also, if you just happen to look at the Earth, and you can see how the continents look like they fit it together in a perfect, puzzle piece. And with expansion, they just, got distance from one another, but they look like they had at one time fit it together pretty perfectly. So, and if we had an ancient civilization that we can find all around the world, could this have been at this time when we had Pangea, which was all together instead of separated by oceans? I propose that, how many millions of years ago this must have been, probably was quite ancient. I think there was one guy named Ben Noel from the Ben Franklin Theoretical Research Institute of Australia, and he suggested a number of 200 million years ago, which would put humankind back at an extremely ancient period of time. So I know that's really out of the bounds for most people in the archaeological realms. We're just exploring ideas. There's nothing, I'm saying nothing is concrete truth about this, but it's just exploring possibilities of perhaps how we can show these particular styles that are all around the world, and perhaps they were related to one Pangea when the Earth was smaller.
I love it. And in your book, I think it's in the conclusion chapter, a bunch of different instances where a dogma was toxic and caused has caused problems for humanity to just go along with. And I think at this point, archaeology in the mainstream and history in the mainstream pretty much fits the bill of untrustworthy by the basis of the evidence that is disregarded and ignored or swept under the rug. And so I tend to just follow more of an intuitive path with how I see the world in history. And in terms of the, how ancient humanity might be or the Earth might be, to me, it seems more resonant as a truth that we've always been here and that the Earth has always existed, rather than there being some kind of in the beginning moment. That's just my opinion. I also think that in terms of the growing Earth, that the cataclysms of this cycle of destruction and regeneration, as described in every monomythical story of every civilization that we have records of old stories from, like the Zendavesta that you show in the book, where Yima talks about the growing of the earth by 3 times a third or something like that. And I think that those possible cyclical moments of destruction and regeneration as described are probably like the regeneration aspect might be the earth growing, or the earth growing itself might be the cataclysm that brings about flooding and destructive events and volcanoes and mud flows, things of that nature. So at this point, I'm ready to just wipe the slate clean and throw out everything mainstream and just explore this from what we can see for ourselves and trust ourselves, trust ourselves with the evidence that is right in front of our eyes rather than deference to authority figures that have lost their credibility through dishonesty. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, and this is like where we get researchers like Graham Hancock gets in trouble because he suggests that civilization might be before the last major ice age or the Younger Dryas. So, we're only talking about a period of 12,000 years when we're talking about the Younger Dryas. So, it's not really, it's a long time as far as human evolution. And conservatively, they're talking about, like anthropologists are talking about 3 million years. So I think it's much older than that. But even if you relate that to 12,000 years ago when human civilization kind of started, archaeologists are still like furious that we're going back that far in the past, and preferring to look at the more, the Sumerian and Mesopotamian cultures as the beginning of civilization, which was, about 5,000 years ago. So, if there's
so in their own stories, they received their culture from something else, somebody else.
Yes, and Anunnaki, exactly. And so, but that's like legend or myth. So it's not really considered all that reliable or important for archaeology, even though you have many cultures all around the world who talk about like legends of gods actually creating, playing around with the genetics of human beings and creating civilization after some cataclysm that happened in the past. So, and the point that I tend to refer to in people like Graham Hancock is that there are so many stories around the world, like hundreds of different stories from various cultures, China, Japan, Australia, of a major flood myth. And after this flood, they had gods that came and helped civilization get started again, teaching them cultivation, farming techniques, how to build roads, and so these kind of legends are so common. I believe there's like 300 of them. But for some reason, the archaeological community doesn't want to bring that into the discussion as to who built, these civilizations and these marvelous, civilizations like in Egypt and what we see at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. And in fact, they claim to say, "Oh, we don't see any evidence at all of an advanced ancient civilization." And I'm like, well, wait a sec. You're looking at it. The pyramids are that advanced civilization. What we see in Peru with the Cyclopean walls are evidence of this advanced civilization. So, there's like a big disconnect going on between the actual physical evidence we have and the story we're getting told.
And I think that you can't discount the story, legend, or myth, especially when there are symbolic similarities between them across the world that are far too many to chalk up to coincidence. So I have a good buddy who's written a long series of books called Spirit World. And there's a couple that I think would really interest you based on, as he started to progress further in his writing, he started really looking at the architecture question. So this one's called The Holy Sailors. I would look up The Holy Sailors, and one called Terminalia being more about the Americas. And actually, I narrated audiobook versions of these two for the audience out there. They can check that out if it's easier than reading. But in Terminalia, Dylan talks about some of the accounts of the early Spanish explorers of the Americas and what stories they got out of the natives before things kind of went sideways, and a lot of their history that was kept in like paintings and tapestries was lost. And the Aztecs have a Noah figure who they called Cox or Tezpi. And there are so many similarities between this figure and Noah that it boggles the mind that they could be unique, separate stories. That at the end of the deluge period, he sends out a hummingbird as opposed to Noah sending out a dove. But it's a similar idea to prove that it's safe for him to get off the boat. That he gave the people the use of the grape and the winemaking qualities that, the Bacchus figure, who's called Noah by a lot of the ancient authors, also does. So it goes on, including in this book, there's a lot of demonstration of the similarity of the rites and rituals of the Aztec peoples to Hebrew customs. When you have like these stories that are similar and you have these strange rites and ceremonies that are like one-to-one the same, you have to start asking the question, were they similar people? And fascinatingly enough, have you heard of the guy Lionel Wafer from the 17th century? Have you heard of this account?
No.
Oh, you got to look into this guy too. There's a buccaneer or privateer named Lionel Wafer came to the New World with a ship of people. He got injured and his ship had to leave him behind when they went back to Europe because he was too hurt. They left him with a tribe that called themselves the Dorian tribe, which is fascinating because that's the name of like a group of Greeks as well, the Dorians. And they healed his thigh with their herbalism knowledge and whatnot. But this guy, he was an Irishman who in less than a month was able to learn the language of the Dorian people because it was so similar to the Highlander language that he grew up speaking. So there's accounts like this that linguistically the similarities are too close, and symbolically the mythology is too close, and traditions are too close, that there's got to be some relationship across the continents. Even the fact that the Quilque people of Peru are called the Quilque, that's the same root as the Celti peoples that were all throughout Europe in the ancient world. I mean, it goes on, but once you start to see like the fingerprints of this, you can't unsee it. And it seems like what we have of these ancient peoples, the stories that we have are like the last people to have memory of something even bigger that came before. So it's awesome. And yeah, check out Lionel Wafer.
Lionel Wafer. Okay. Sounds interesting. Well, there's similar kinds of stories that we hear. Well, actually, the Amara people that live in Lake Titicaca have a very similar language. I believe it was to the Japanese out of all languages. But they say there's so many similarities. So it's an interesting idea. Were revisited by people from Japan, or were they related to one another at some time in the past? And we also find there's a museum, I think it's down in Copacabana in Bolivia, and they have a bowl where they have like very ancient Proto-Sumerian language on this bowl. And they found it buried deep within the environs of, Tiwanaku. So, how are we sharing, cuneiforms and with the Sumerians, who are thousands of miles and over an ocean on another continent? So when they said, people weren't seafaring, the Amara were not seafaring people. So, we definitely have some lost moments in our history and things that just don't make any sense unless we're willing to kind of think out of the box and look at perhaps that the ancients were seafarers and they could cross over oceans, or even perhaps maybe at one time, when the earth was smaller, it made it easier for them to get across these these water systems. So, there's a lot of anomalies, and we should have a right to ask these questions about human evolution and ancient civilizations. So, it's quite fascinating how the languages got dispersed.
Yep, I think language is one of the last places where we can find these kind of traces, because just the odds of even 10 words being the same between one language and another, and there not being a relationship in origin between those languages, is over like hundreds of thousands to one odds. I've seen mathematicians take on that question, and we're talking about similarities of dozens and dozens of words that we know of. But going on from there, and of course, the seafaring question, right? How long is a wooden ship going to last throughout time before it decays and deteriorates? Not long. So to just say that they didn't have the knowledge of seafaring is crazy. We can't really prove that in any sensible way. But while we're in this next 20 minutes of time, I think it'd be great if you wanted to show us some of the sites that you find most compelling, and maybe even demonstrate some of the similarities of attributes from regions far distant across the world. That would be really fun.
Well, let's see. Let's do a little screen sharing, I guess. This is a site in Sacsayhuaman Park, which is called Cochapata, and very near the citadel walls, the colossal polygonal walls. This is an example of what we'd call Hanampacha. And so it's usually this typical gray type of limestone, which is actually very hard. It's not your typical limestone, which is considered a fairly soft rock. But one of the things you will notice with the Hanampacha is it has these kinds of shapes that we don't exactly know what these forms were used for. And so this is at the same site. And here we can see what looks like fingerprints, which are pushing up the material of what is later going to be rock. I believe this is a geopolymer. I've seen so many examples of this kind of stuff all over Sacsayhuaman. And you can see even here in the back, there is a place where there's fingers that are pushing up this material. So, it really has like forms that are, hard to figure out. Like this doesn't look quite like the normal like chair or, or even basin. It looks like water will flow out of it. But there's so much of these irregular forms all over this park that, it really looks like it's made by a different mind. And they were using what looks like a geopolymer because there are so many of these bizarre shapes put into the rock itself, into the living rock. You will also see things.
The mainstream is like, they did all that with soft copper tools. They just chiseled it with copper.
Exactly, copper, bronze, and pounding stones. But the problem is that you have these edges that are 90-degree perfect angles, and sometimes in very like we're only talking maybe like an inch of space. So to do this with copper tools, which are actually softer than the stones. It doesn't really make sense. Or pounding rocks to get these really perfect 90-degree angles. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And also you can see like a lot of evidence of vitrification. And vitrification is when you have a very high heat applied to the stone. And you typically need a heat of about 1400 Celsius to get stone to vitrify. So, there's a lot of like how in the world did they get this kind of heat to cause the rock to actually turn into a glass-like surface? And here you can see this is the Mara Marca Wasi Cave, which is in Sacsayhuaman Park, and you can see all the vitrification like throughout the cave. So these are things like the Incas didn't really have the tools that could create, these high heats or the tools to cut through these like hardened stone. And even if we are talking about limestone, which is relatively soft, we do have examples in andesites and diorite, which are actually volcanic stone, which are much harder. So you still couldn't really do much of these structures with copper stones. So this is Hanan Pacha. The second style is what we call the megalithic. And here you can see one of these megalithic rocks at Ollantaytambo. And here you can see kind of right in the middle a scoop mark. And that is something pretty common. You see this a lot in not only the Hanan Pacha, but you see it in the middle style, the megalithic style. You'll see that what look like scoop marks. And this is very, very common. When you're visiting these sites, you can see this everywhere. Here is another great example. So here you can see what looks like somebody just had a big spoon and was just, scooping out, and you can see the remnants of this.
It's not how a chisel would look.
No, to do this with copper tools doesn't make sense. And also, this is actually pretty wide. I would say each one of these scoop marks are about 4 inches wide. So, I don't believe they had even a copper chisel of 4 inches wide that could cut through this stuff. And I believe this actually is like andesite stone, which is extremely hot, extremely hard. So, it looks like the ancients knew how to deal with geopolymers, or at least with high heats, which is a technology we don't really understand today. Though with geopolymers, there are people today who are making them right now. So we are learning more about using geopolymers to actually create stones.
I have a good friend who's also a podcast host and a builder who is trained in geopolymer techniques that he says are the same as those used for the Giza pyramids. So I'll have to hook you guys up for a conversation about geopolymers over on his show, Biocharisma, because I think he could get, you guys could come to even greater epiphanies than me. I'm a lot less learned in that subject. But to me, geopolymers, of all the possibilities, is the only one that even seems not just remotely plausible, but actually quite likely in terms of more likely than quarrying and carrying these giant blocks. That's nonsense.
Exactly.
There's a funny account in your book actually about the question of quarrying. I wanted to share. The only report we have from the Spanish chroniclers about the Inca moving massive stones comes from Garcilaso de la Vega in his Royal Commentary of the Incas. He mentions an account of how an Inca king had tried to emulate the achievement of his predecessors by attempting to transport just one massive rock from miles away to the fortification. Unfortunately, it was an unmitigated disaster. De la Vega writes, this boulder was hauled across the mountain by more than 20,000 Indians going up and down very steep hills, and that at a certain spot, it fell from their hands over a precipice, crushing more than 3,000 men. I mean, that's tragic, but, tragedy plus time equals comedy. And I think that's how we should see all of it as comical, that we would be expected to believe quarried stones were brought.
Exactly. And some of these stones, I'll find the Chincana Grande, they're massive. They're absolutely, 500 tons or more. So to say the Andes is like some of the most mountainous country, in the world. And you have to pass through ravines, and you have to pass through frequently wide rivers, and to carry these kinds of rocks with just simple ropes and manpower. It just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fly for me. And this is one of the rocks they call the lazy stone, or Chincana Grande. And this is one of the rocks they say they actually carried this way. And this thing it's so massive. I would say it's probably
Did they have Superman? Or how did you do this?
Exactly. And it's about, probably 80 by 50 feet wide and by length. And it's very, very much wedded into the land. I mean, it's deep in there. These are things that I think have been there long before the Inca was there. And they happen to be built on these river banks or stream systems. So water is running underneath them. And I think this is, it's kind of folly to attribute everything that you're seeing in Sacsayhuaman to the Inca, because we're seeing such different styles. This is so, dramatically different than what we know of Inca and Quilque work. It looks nothing like them. But we're heading back to the Hanan-Pacha construction. But the megalithic looks more like this. And this is where we see the joinery to be very perfect. And this is where they describe that you can't even get a piece of paper in between each of the rocks, in between the joints. So this is another style, and we don't know exactly who built this, but this is typically called the Cyclopean style. So just because of the size of the rocks, and which are just seem to be created by giants because they're so huge. And Peru, I believe, has some of the finest examples of this particular style. And this particular photo is in Ollantaytambo. You can see here lichen, which is on the side of these rocks, which seems to indicate you can actually find out how old it is by the lichen that is actually growing on these rocks. But I don't believe any particular studies have been done on that. And let's see in Sacsayhuaman what we have. And here again, we can see pressed in forms that are in the rocks. It's very obvious in this particular photo. And so you can see scoop marks, kind of not exactly holes, but imprints that are being pushed into the matrix of the rock, which would imply a geopolymer. 2012, there was a group of Russian geologists who were invited by the Ministry of Culture of Peru to come in and actually do work to find out why the site was actually beginning, some of these rocks were beginning to be pushed out, and there were gaps that were growing in there. And so these Russians came and did an analysis of the stones, and they discovered with like 30 samples that all the stones had a microcrystalline structure within them, which was very different from the quarry rock, where they said all these rocks came from. In the quarry rock, you could actually find fossils, but in the citadel walls, all of these fossils had been pulverized out, and what they found was a microcrystalline structure. And so the Russians told the Ministry of Culture that they really believe these rocks were geopolymers.
I'd say it's pretty bulletproof that it's not quarried if you can't find the fossilization that should be there in limestone.
Yes, exactly. And but the Ministry of Culture of Peru didn't really like that answer. So there was a couple of the scientists there that got up and complained, this is not the reality that we have, figured out over time, but mainly part of the problem is in the world of archaeology. They have a story, a narrative that they've kind of stuck with for decades now, centuries probably, that these were all created by men hauling them and lifting them and slowly putting them into place by chipping them away slowly. So
and no one has ever demonstrated that that's even possible. No one has done that.
They haven't.
Which means there's nothing scientific about these so-called archaeologists. This is not science. This is like a weird dogma where their reputation of holding up that they were never wrong and they could never be wrong is more important than the truth. And that is, to me, it makes me angry that that's like the norm in these fields, and is why, as I said earlier, throw it all out. We don't need you to tell us the truth. We can see with our own eyes,
Yeah. I guess maybe there's some things valid. Like if you look at with the official narrative, they could be talking like, for instance, you have Pedro Cieza. He was a chronicalista, and he said basically he described the Incas actually building on top of Sacsayhuaman, but he was saying they had 20,000 men bringing rocks and working on them, and they were master masons. But he also indicated that what was there prior to the Inca construction was a far more grand than anything the Incas built. So in some ways, I think they're kind of conflating the grand citadel walls actually with the Inca work, because it's actually political, and it's probably marketing today. They're marketing that the Inca built all of this stuff. More and more people today, even Peruvians, are beginning to question that. And, and I think we're going to see in the next few years, we're going to see big changes in theories as to who could have constructed them. But for now, that's still the dominant theory.
Well, as they say, science doesn't move forward with evidence and discoveries. It moves forward with deaths.
Yes.
Once the old guard is gone, then the new
guard comes in, right? And new hypotheses and theories will present themselves.
So can you show us some evidence from other areas of the world that demonstrate similar construction techniques?
Okay, I'm going to close this.
This is great, by the way. I want to tell you how valuable it is for you to share the imagery. A lot of these photos, I'm sure you took yourself, right?
Yes.
Because this stuff is, again, I guess it's for the same reason, but this stuff is getting harder and harder to find in Google image search, decent imagery of this kind of thing. I'll find something interesting and then go look for it 2 weeks later and it doesn't exist anymore. So people out there that are fascinated by these subjects, when you come across photo evidence or even, written testimonies, just find a way to save it offline, because the internet is not a guarantee at this point.
Yes.
I'll remind people again, I already brought it up, but Dylan's book, Terminalia, Spirit World Book 6, is a great exploration of the topics we brought up from a mythological, philological standpoint, but also from archaeological, and talking about some of the very chroniclers that you brought up too. The relationship between the old world and the new world is a lot more clear and defined than the mainstream would want you to believe. And that makes sense when you consider at the time of the conquistadors, the Roman or the Holy Roman Empire, the church, especially as it was concentrated in power in Spain, would have derived a lot of its authority from the Abrahamic narrative, the religions of the Abrahamic faiths, the narrative of the origin of the world being in Adam and Eve, and the power derived from being descendants of Noah and etc. If you were able to show that, hey, there was people over here too, it throws a monkey wrench in that entire history and thus the entire sort of royal aspect of what was the power structures at the time. And now we're just writing the coattails of the misconceptions planted in the 17th century and afterwards. So we're grateful for people like you doing their best to correct the record and show us the mind-blowing stuff that maybe they've never seen before. Do you have any closing thoughts for the people as we're wrapping up here, and want to give them reminders of how they can find your work and connect with you online?
Sure. Yeah, my website is sorcerersofstone.com. And you can find my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, virtually any of the big, distributors, sites and stuff. And I would just encourage people to visit these sites because they're really amazing and, and transformative. So, if you're interested in history, if you're interested in earth sciences, if you're interested in, any kind of transformation of your consciousness and your soul, these sites are great places to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Tell your dog that your dog is very good and patient, and
he's sleeping.
keep doing the good work out there, and maybe we'll catch up with you again if you have some new research down the line.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Chance. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
All right, my dudes and ladies. Thanks for tuning in to another great episode. Always appreciate the experience of getting to read a book and talk to the author about their work. And this one definitely did not disappoint. Maybe a little shorter on the plus extension than what we're used to. The screen share part of this conversation required a fair bit of editing on my end to give it the smooth and gorgeous transitionality that you experienced here. Assuming that you watched the video version of this episode, it's all good if you're on the audio RSS feed. I'd like people to be subscribed everywhere they possibly can. But definitely, if this caught your interest through your ear holes, you might want to go get your eyeballs on it too. My Rockfin, BitChute, well, don't use BitChute. YouTube, you got Odyssey and Rumble. I stopped updating BitChute. It seems buggy. Haven't been able to actually get a video to upload for months there. Anyway, if you are curious about what we talked about in second half, the Plus extension available on Patreon, also Rockfin, or my YouTube channel membership for this one. Nothing too spicy to keep it off there. We got into more photographic evidence of other ancient world megaliths from areas far, far away from Peru, but similar to that construction style, what they call Cyclopean. But that's in Europe, and they also have similar architecture and masonry all the way over in the Far East, like Japan. Fans of Stellium 7 and his giant elephant mountain will enjoy the other photographs that we look through of some seemingly giant petrified animals or sculptures thereof. Then we went on to discuss how ancient sites were engineered for acoustic resonance and sound healing. Camille shared personal experiences with a paranormal or supernatural bent, you might say, including some vibrating rock formations at Nuapa Iglesia. We discussed energetic and psychic activations and initiations at these sacred sites, the potentiality of these megalithic structures being used for some sort of far antiquitech energy production. Then we got into applied biogeometry, a cool divergence about dowsing, and how practices like that can help you learn to trust your intuitive knowledge. And we wrapped it all up with the mystery of the Nazca mummies with elongated heads and possibly hybrid humans. It was very well-rounded indeed. So get on Patreon, $8 a month. At this point in this economy, it's practically nothing. You're buying me a couple of coffees, right? Not that I need any more coffee. I'm doing really well with that, by the way. Thanks for asking. Staying off the caffeine after lunch for the most part. I'm pretty proud of myself. Feeling a lot better thanks to the shift. If for fans of the show in a long-term sense, the whole electrolysis and growing earth hypothesis that Camille puts forward in her book, well, she doesn't put forward the electrolysis growing earth, but that's something I've put forward before. And her discussions of a growing earth and the possibilities of that, they come from a more, heliocentric mainstream astrophysicists and geologists point of view, which I appreciated as she chased down some of the more fringe theories about these Peruvian sacred sites that she didn't really land on any kind of compelling evidence for differences of orbit being explanatory factors in the various world ages. Because, in my opinion, and what seems to be self-evident fact for a lot of us, the Earth does not orbit around the sun. So how could we possibly have a difference of orbit when that is not a thing? Also fans of Dylan's work, like his book Terminalia, Spirit World Book 6, which you can get on audio, on Audible, narrated by yours truly, they will happen to notice some of the philological interesting connections between these Peruvian and Andean deities and mythologies, like the fact that their sun god is called Inti, I-N-T-I, and we know about vowel shifts and we know about T to D switches. So Inti is on D, the god on, aka the sun, which is already the sun god for the Andeans. Gotta love it. Even the word Andy, like Andean, Andi, it's all there very clearly. I also find what they call Chicana or Chicana symbol in Peru and in South America to be quite clearly a similar cross type of symbol that we see throughout the world relating to these solar cults. Also, Chicana sounds just like Shekinah. Same exact word, more or less. One thing I loved in her book that I didn't get her to go through in like bullet point order, though, in regards to the very easily disputed Peruvian or Inca origins of these huacas, they're called, these crazy shrines. I'll go through her. It's in her introduction, so I feel like I'm not giving too much away. But the mainstream archaeologists and the Peruvian Ministry of Culture, they say that the Inca created these over a period of 94 years. Their empire didn't last that long. So her key reasons why that's implausible are, first of all, these sites, these huacas, are unlike any known Incan buildings in style or function. Most of them are metamorphosed limestone, which is extremely hard to shape. And they're claiming that these Inca, using bronze and copper tools or pounding stones, were somehow creating this precision megalithic sculpting. Nonsense. Third, the quantity of huacas found in the area is off the charts. There's over 328 just in the Cusco area and countless others throughout Peru, Bolivia, and Chile. So where did these Inca in 94 years find the time and the resources to create so many of these, considering they spent most of their time in warfare to maintain their empire? And then last but not least is the fact that we find very similar formations everywhere from Bulgaria to Japan, Italy, Portugal, even China. I mean, that's a short list. They're basically across the world. So to me, great evidence of the universal system, you could call it, the ancient universal empire, the real universal empire, to name Dylan's most recent publication. Great book. Check that one out too. I don't have an Audible reading of that, but I think he took over since he's got Substack to do that for himself, which is good on him. And we'll be seeing Dylan again really soon. Got a very exciting special guest. If you remember the last and only time we had a special guest with our Inner World podcast, well, we're having that special guest again just in a couple weeks from now. So look forward to that. I've already got the next InnerVerse episode recorded and in the can. And if you guys have been missing Vibrant on Wednesday, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. Ever since that conversation with Stephen Young the second time, we had all those great elemental epiphanies about quality over quantity and how quantitative thinking is very seemingly the bane of the Western civilization's entire perceptual framework. I've taken that super seriously, quality over quantity. So if that means we're just doing one episode a week, so be it. And I'm definitely going to prioritize the content that has an exclusive members only section so that I'm giving my supporters something special. And going forward, I will try to get a live stream in on Wednesdays as I used to. I've actually got them scheduled out for the most of the month of February and starting into March, and hopefully I can keep that going. But like I said, I'm not going to, no more slapping things together at the last minute just to keep a self-imposed schedule and regulation of that. It's not needed. You guys have plenty of things to watch out there. I don't need to break your trust by haphazard content creation. I'm taking it all very seriously going forward. And I think the content that has been made since that decision has reflected that decision quite nicely. Very excited for some of the things I've got coming up in the month of February. Just nothing but bangers. Get ready. Thanks for being here. Baby's doing well. We passed the 3-month mark just the other day. She had her very first legit giggle fit, which was unreal. Anyone that's got a baby, I'm sure you felt the same way the first time you saw your baby laugh uncontrollably. Not only laughing, but laughing uncontrollably. Very fun. Apparently she likes the mischief of dogs. So really enjoying life right now. Hope you guys can say the same. Check out the website for lots of bonus ways to support InnerVerse. By website, I mean the show description, including the link to innerversepodcast.com/sound-healing, where you can sign up for a biofield tuning with yours truly. And those are going incredibly well too. I think I've got some stories about that in the next episode that I've already recorded, so I'll save it. But suffice to say, if you are curious, there's a lot of free learning you can get on that page. And if you want to pull the trigger and get a session with me, I recommend doing so because I usually run about 4 to 6 weeks out in terms of booking availability, which means that I wouldn't say I'm staying busy with it. I don't believe in being busy. I am doing exactly the pace that I feel capable of without any kind of burnout or loss of enthusiasm. So, 3 or 4 sessions a week, that seems to work for me, and we'll keep it going. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Love y'all. Hope you enjoyed this megalithic mystery investigation. I sure did. And we'll see you on the next one. Much love. Take care out there.